Happy Tuesday, and welcome to Let's Talk Justice. I'm Jade Williams.
I'm happy that you've assumed
I'm only introducing because I'm so used to it for the past couple of weeks.
my, look what 3 weeks without me would have resulted in.
Well, they say when you vacate your space, there's always somebody there to take
take
a
it up.
position.
My name is Michael Jackson.
And you are for the
I'm the executive director of Jamaicans for Justice. One would think that I vacated this seat for some 6 months. It was only 3 weeks.
What a sabbatical for you. Well, welcome back, Michael. We're happy to have you back.
I am so happy to be here. I'm in the warmth of my country again.
Yes.
For those who are listening, I was not on vacation leave. I was actually on Jamaicans for Justice official duty. So I am tired and suffering from lethargy. So let's not pay Jade any mind. But it is certainly good to be back with the team and, of course, our listeners who are joining us via Radioland on Bridge 99. Thank you so much for keeping with us. I've been watching the show when I can. And I think the last couple of weeks went remarkably well. And I want to extend my own appreciation to those who joined us. I know Sharika Mills,
Yes,
close friend of ours.
Yeah, was doing co-host duties last week.
Yes. So, very, very good. And last week you introduced that it's May month.
Yeah, it is child.
And we are recognizing our children, the future of Jamaica. And I want to say to every child, you deserve the best of what Jamaica has to offer. And I think you should be living the best life that you can, one that recognizes your right to education, your right to health. It's not in the Constitution, but we still have it based on the conventions of the rights of the child to which Jamaica is a signatory. Your social and cultural rights, all of these rights, our children should have good families.
Absolutely.
Listen to them.
Well,
knock on their doors.
I love
before
that,
you enter.
Best interest of the child line. And I think when we think about it, we have to be holistic,
Yes.
Best interest in every single way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're continuing with our Child Month theme, and we're going to be joined by Kimberly Marriott Blake, another close colleague of ours.
Yes.
She's the executive director for the Jamaica Association for the Deaf. What is happening with me today? But JAD is an organization that we work closely with, and Kimberly in particular. I don't want to sing her too many good things before she joins us. But she's awesome, I think. So we're going to be joined by us. But before we get into that, as usual, we're going to be talking about what happened last week. In terms of human rights recap, and there are a couple of things. Before I start, we're talking about Child's Month, and I think you spoke about this last week, the mandatory minimum that the government is proposing.
Yes.
And I want to say that we're roundly rejecting those proposals to see the Child Care and Protection Act, my God, actually being proposed for amendment to see our nation's children serving a mandatory minimum of 20 years imprisonment if charged with murder, if charged and convicted. And some of us will be looking at it and say, but it's murder though. But the government must always seek to balance the best interest of the child with that of public safety. And when I talk about best interest, is this child beyond rehabilitation?
And how do we determine
exactly.
that? Yeah.
And for the life of me, I can't see a 14-year-old being beyond rehabilitation. So that has to be considered. And again, the matter of allowing the judge to look at the unique circumstances of each case to make that balance. Best interest of the child with public safety.
Before you move on, I just want to say that Minister Chuck did say in his address last week that it will be open to Joint Select Committee, these proposals. So I'm looking out for that date, and I encourage those of us who are appalled by that as well. You should be aware that a citizen can make a submission, as minimal as it is, to the Parliament at that time. So if you are rejecting this as we are, please ensure that you let your voice be heard so that we can prevent something like this going forward.
And I encourage young people to make their voices heard as well. You're far too important in this democratic process.
Absolutely.
To allow older people like myself.
Yes, especially those youth advocates.
Pushing 40 and so on, right?
Yes.
We need to hear your voices. Now, there were a couple other things that happened. Last night, apparently, at the PNP's, the People's National Party headquarters, a very disgraceful display took place. For me, there were two incidents that jumped out, and I think they should be condemned strongly by all Jamaicans. This is not a political issue. So last night at the PNP headquarters, some journalists, how dare they wore green to the place of orange, and they were told to remove themselves because they're wearing apparently the color green. It is completely fixed to the Jamaica Labour Party to the point where the PNP representatives felt the need to say leave. Mr. Dexroy Martin of the PNP, we note that you extended an apology, but unfortunately this should not have been released from your mouth in the first place.
Yes.
And I think when I look at that incident, it brings home the importance of the political ombudsman, which the current administration saw it fit to do away with. But that's one. Now, the other incident was another individual at the PNP headquarters who threatened a female journalist at the RGR that he will rape her. Now, if an individual feels so emboldened to say such a statement publicly, my God, what would you do privately?
To be quite frank, what that individual did is a crime.
And I think the police ought to be involved.
Yes.
And I saw
agree.
the PNP's release, distancing themselves from it, commendable. But it has to go more than that. Some investigation needs to be had, and that individual found and turned over to the police.
Absolutely.
To feel the full brunt of the law.
Absolutely.
Rape is far too high in this country, the incidence of it, for us to make it a political issue, as I see some people doing online, to make this one where, from a national standpoint, we will say to this individual, we will not stand for it. And I hope that the PNP's leadership as well will see it fit. Yes, you accept Mr. Martin's apology for his comment he made towards the journalist about wearing the green. But some disciplinary measures, I hope, will go his way.
Absolutely.
And it goes back to the point as well, the Press Freedom Index. Not sure if you had the chance to read that.
Yes, I did look at it.
We fell 20 spots.
Yes.
Moving from 12 last year, our ranking, to 32. And Jamaica is within the region of the Americas. The United States, El Salvador, Trinidad, which also saw, themselves losing a bit. But what was interesting, I see people saying, how did they make that determination? Nothing much has changed. And I think the flaw in the report is that it broadly spoke to the region rather than saying specifically, this is what would have made this country's ranking go down. But it spoke broadly to issues like the Data Protection Act. I remember that being a concern a couple of years ago. The legislative landscape in terms of the access to information. When state agencies respond to it, it may not be timely. They redact. So sometimes you get a page asking the most simple questions, simplest of questions, and you get a page returned black as ever.
Yes.
Completely redacted, which means that there's not much compliance from select state agents. I won't say all of them, because some of them respond timely and they respond fulsomely. So I think the government ought to take a real look as why. But I can see certainly an incident like last night. Perhaps we made that ranking move from 32 go all the way down to perhaps 60 something. Not a good look for the country at all.
We definitely have to consider security as we consider press freedom, like the security of the press that we expect to challenge the status quo in their reporting.
Yes.
So you've taken a lot of time on your return. Thank you, Mikhail.
I think I'm owed 3 weeks worth of couple of minutes, yes? So okay. If I normally take 2 minutes, I think I should be afforded 6 this week.
Take it up with your control room. I will not scold you. All right, so we're gonna move straight into our right of the day this week. And in keeping with Child's Month, we are talking about what our obligations are when it comes to the protection of our children. So this is from the Child Care and Protection Act. Now it states that any person who has information which causes that person to suspect that a child has been or is likely to be abandoned, neglected, physically or sexually ill-treated, or is otherwise in need of care and protection, a report must be made to the registry. And this is important as there is a penalty for you if it is found out that you were aware that a child was in need of care and protection and failed to make that report. So it's essential that we do so.
What's that, $500,000?
Yes, it is.
Or 6 months.
$500,000 fine or 6 months imprisonment.
Yes.
And that's quite expensive for omissions, so let's not. We also have a Did You Know this week, and it focuses on our Disabilities Act. So sorry for those who expected to win a credit this week, next week again. Keep watching. But this week's Did You Know is speaking about access. So under the Disabilities Act, it makes sure to distinguish that access is not just physical access, but should also include access to benefits, should allow those persons to make use of the benefits, and allow for communication that can be understood and the capacity to receive and make use of information. And I really like that it adds the make use of, because I think you can have information, but the means to use that information is still accessible. That was inaccessible, I should say. That was not considered.
All right. Yeah. So thank you so much, Jade. So as we said, this week we're focusing on promoting equal opportunities for children with disabilities, and we're going to be joined by Kimberly Sherlock Marriott Blake, who is the Executive Director for Jamaica Association for the Deaf. Now, when we look at statistics globally, it's quite alarming when we see that persons living with disabilities, they tend to be among the most vulnerable, the poorest. Education not being attained and so on. And within Jamaica, it's no different. Persons with disabilities, they face disparaging names, derogatory terminologies, stigma, discrimination, marginalization, social exclusion that forces them to live on the fringes of society. Yeah?
Yes, and those that care for persons with disabilities also face shocking disadvantages. 43% of women who have had children with disabilities in Jamaica were unemployed, and their account of this is due to the need to be at home to care for the child, and the lack of government assistance, because as we know, certain assistance from the government you can only get if you are part of the lowest socioeconomic level, meaning you don't have access to potable water or to a flush toilet.
Now, when we look at a report, the situational analysis of persons with disabilities in Jamaica, one of the things that we look at is the disparity between able-bodied children and those with disabilities. Those with disability, they tend to attain up to primary level education as their highest attainment, versus those who are able-bodied tend to attain your tertiary level, move on to the better paid jobs and so on. So that disparity is something that really needs to be looked at. And when we're having the conversation with Mrs. Marriott Blake, we're going to be probing that a little bit more in terms of unemployment, underemployment among those who are living with disabilities in the country.
All right, yes. So when we come back from the break, we'll do that.
All right, we take a break.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are joined by Executive Director of Jamaica Association for the Deaf, Kimberly Sherlock Marriott Blake. And we're talking about access for children with disabilities. Kimberly, are you with us?
Am I coming across clearly?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Marriott Blake. Thank you so much.
All right. Yes.
All right.
Hello?
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
Let us just start out by you just painting a picture for us, if you could, of any estimated number of children we have living with disabilities, and what are some of the issues that they face?
Well, let's look at big picture. The World Health Organization says above a population are persons with some disability. Yes, that will include older persons. Yes, that will include children, and that may include that mix of persons who migrate between countries and persons who migrate from parish to parish, right? But the 15% is expected to be even higher in poorer countries, and higher in countries where a larger percentage of the population are in poorer communities.
Yes.
So while that 15% is that global estimation, we could easily estimate that of that 15%, let's say maybe 50% are under 18. We also need to take into consideration that when we speak of children with disabilities, we need to think about the kids who have not yet had the opportunity to be properly assessed and diagnosed. And we also need to factor in the unfortunate reality of violence playing a part in children becoming or getting or having a disability as they move into, not necessarily in the very younger ages, but in older ages, as they get into that preteen and teen age period where they may be out on the street playing with friends, shots are fired, they happen to be hit by a stray bullet. We've seen quite a few times, over the years, children being impacted by stray bullets and the reality of what that can do for the child, whether it results in that child not being able to move freely, having fortunate impact to their overall physical and intellectual capacities.
Let me pause you one second, Mrs. Marriott Blake. I just want to re-emphasize something that you said. 15% of a population of Jamaica's size, which I think is over 2.8 million now, you're looking at 427,000 persons. And if I divide it by 2, when you say those living under 18, you're talking of over 200,000 persons are estimated to be living with disabilities. But that number may very well be higher when you look at 2 factors: the violence in certain communities being affected by stray bullet. But you touched on something I want to really reiterate, re-emphasize, whatever the re-word is, that how we discipline our children sometimes put them at harm's way. The box in the face, the hitting in the head, the hitting with the tires, the broomstick, and so on.
Slamming against the hard surface.
Yes,
those things
will lead to disability.
On a child.
And importantly, we have this thing in Jamaica, Kimberly, and I want to say this. We would love to walk around and say, "Don't spit me." Because we don't assess the children to really know what the underlying issues may or may not be. So we don't take up the micro assessment that, we just label the children as dunce, fool. Those type of derogatory terms that I grew up in the Big Yard family, in St. Anne, so I know it well, Kimberly. Yeah? So I just wanted to emphasize those points that you made mention of earlier. Please continue with just outlining the types of disabilities that they may very well face or have.
So it's quite a realities on the table. We can't assume that any one child has, or any one community has, a higher number of children with a particular disability, because disability can happen for different reasons. It could be genetics, it could be an accident or some kind of trauma.
Yes.
It could be a situation or a challenge during birth. It could be something that happens during pregnancy. It could be something that is acquired as the child develops. Children who are premature can have a higher susceptibility to some disabilities. So children who are premature, for example, hearing loss, vision loss are higher for that group of children. And then you also look at maternal health, and I mentioned the point about older children being impacted by violence and so on, because we have seen great strides in maternal health. As a country, we've seen great strides. We've seen great strides in some of those early childhood, postnatal, that first few years health, where there is that level of diligence, I think, that has significantly increased over the years. And I believe that has had an impact on identifying children. Here's where we have a major problem. There are very few service providers in public sector. And so you get the paper that says do the test, but the test is 6 months down the line, because that's where you could get an appointment. And unfortunately, between the time that you get the paper to say there may be something that we have to address and the time that the assessment is done, that overwhelmed a lot of parents, feel. The point was raised about the number of families where mom, grandma, somebody has to stay home to stay with that child. That overwhelm can lead to so many other issues. the mental and emotional toll on the parents that then gets passed to the child, unfortunately, that can have additional impacts on that child, having more of a compounded challenge in just managing and how we execute the interventions that are needed to ensure that that child is not further impacted by mental health challenges down the line. So whether the disability is physical, sensory, which is vision or hearing, or an intellectual disability, or one where it is just a limitation.
Have we lost Mrs. Marriott Blake?
Seem to be having a challenge here.
Mrs. Marriott Blake, are you with us? Not hearing her.
Not hearing her.
But she was mentioning the importance of that postnatal support, and I was wondering as well how social class and economics really play a role in some of these access to services, the health services.
No, for sure.
One of the questions I really wanted to probe with her as well, what are some of those warning signs that we should be looking out for as new parents? If you're like my mother, for example, my son was just born. Country people, I love my mom. She came to me and said, "Michael, me hear one little sound." I did not sleep for about a week. My child was quite healthy, but what are those warning signs wherein you should be listening and it's not putting the matches stick in the hair to prevent whatever? You can't go to the beach. What are the real medical issues, Jay, that you can think of?
I think one of the things that I have identified with numerous observations is like verbalization and kind of a like motor skills. That's also one of them.
Yes.
And I draw to, I see we're coming up on the break shortly, but I draw to my personal experience, because I think also when we think about disabilities, one thing I like that Kimberly said is how a disability can occur, like for example a child being shot or something like that. And what happened was my brother for a good period of time was at a disadvantage in terms of his learning, because he would have been out of school due to medical issues, right? And I don't think we consider we consider those challenges, and it would have been something that my mother would have had to do specialized training for him to learn how to read and write, send him to a specialized school for
that was
a good
what
period
age
of his life, and it started I think when he was about 3.
But you see, your mom paid attention.
Yes, but luckily
We
for
beat
her,
a
or
lot.
unluckily, he had a seizure. And
So
that's like
really,
a clear indication.
So that is the thing. The physical signs are there, and we pay attention. But I think those with intellectual disabilities face a real barrier.
Yes.
Because again, we
it's
beat
not that
children.
easily identifiable.
Why you not learn?
Yes.
And then we compare our children to others, not realizing that we should pay attention to the cognitive development phases, the motor skills, as you were saying, based on age. What should my child be doing? And I said reasonably so, because I tell you I come from the country and I know the matches stick and all of these things. No go beach when you're pregnant because this will happen to you. And the matches stick, I think them says the pay will come and make whatever happen to your child. These things are important because it goes into, I don't want to take it as a joke.
I have to interrupt you. Our guest is back.
Kimberly, you're back with us? All right.
Yes, technology decided to do what technology does when you need it to be.
At the most inopportune time. We're going to take the break, Kimberly, but I wanted to guide us through the warning signs, the reasonable ones, and not the Jamaican proverbs that we tend to listen to. Yeah? So we take the break.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice.
Thank you so much. Kimberly, before the break, I was asking you, what are those warning signs that parents should really be looking out for as we ensure that our children, we can cater to any development challenges that they may or may not have?
I'm going to be honest. It can be hard to find those warning signs because depending depending on some of the other realities that you have happening at home,
Yes.
you may not pick up on something. What I will say, COVID really was the great equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of parents, a lot of parents who over the years, teachers have been saying, boy, mommy, room. And when kids stayed home, some of the things that you can consider if you're calling to your child and they're not responding, do not always assume I just body pitney bad or stubborn.
Yes.
Because it could be that child is
Kimberly?
So having some real challenges with the connection.
But I liked where she's going again. It goes back to the importance of, as parents, let's try not to label our children.
Yes.
Mine will be quick to tell you that I'm just a child.
I think there is a constant assumption of disrespect. I think that's one of the things in our culture that we have to address if we're going to treat our children fairly. Because I think also, because we don't think of children, as people, we think of them as subordinates. And so there is a level of respect that is necessary in every interaction. We don't consider that this could not be the intent of the child, it's just punishment first. And so it might be difficult for you to find, those challenges as Kimberly's illustrating, it might be difficult for you to identify those issues.
So even children who are hyperactive and you have the medical terminology, it slips me now.
Yeah, well, you can be. What's funny, it's not necessarily hyperactivity. There's been a discussion to say that maybe we should rename the issue.
Yeah.
But right now it's called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
It's the ADHD.
Right.
Yes.
But the H may not be there, which they call attention deficit disorder. But it is just a challenge, a genuine challenge that the child has with focusing on one issue, one task.
Yes.
Like it's not a need to disrespect. The child literally has a challenge that needs to be addressed, that they need to be able to cope with. I think Kimberly is back with us now.
Yeah, and Jade has pointed out something that is really important. It's that there are instances where a child is not focused. It could be that genuinely this child is having a challenge.
Yes.
Is challenged in the environment. It could just be that the environment is far too overstimulating. It may be a disability. It may just be that this child needs a little bit more time to adapt and cope. And one of the things that we have to be very vigilant about when we have children who go through significant trauma, which is not uncommon for a Jamaican child, when we have children who go through trauma, you may see changes in the way they interact with other kids and the way they engage with other people. They need support. Beating them is not going to get them to socialize better. It's throwing them back in a classroom after they've experienced the loss of a family member is not going to make things go back to normal. And sometimes the disabilities that we assume is just bad behavior, with the slightest change in the environment can make a world of difference for that child. And so things that a parent can look out for. If your child does, out of the blue, there's just a change in behavior, look into what it may be. And it may not be that they've caught another cold from school. It may genuinely be that they are struggling, mentally or emotionally. It may be that something was said to them. We can't take for granted that someone has not made an inappropriate comment that has kind of thrown them off. And because of that, they've kind of just moved into a little shell. That's something to really think through. How is that impacting my child? There's also, I'll be honest, there's also the issue of not allowing health situations to linger. Hearing loss is so much more significant in the case of a child who has an ear infection that goes unattended.
Yes.
If you're seeing that your child is constantly rubbing their eyes, they're complaining about their eyes hurting, they're having challenges. It's not just a little eye drop and washed out with water and we'll move on and nothing's happening. It could genuinely be that they're struggling with something that can have a lasting impact. And so not delaying health. And I know that's difficult because when you're in an environment where every work day every single work day is a day that you have to either show up or not get paid. And in households that don't have the kind of the luxury of what I would say vacation and paid time off, not going to work to take your child to the clinic, which is a whole day experience, so that you can find out that it's just something in them eye and to look at eye drops ain't good, might cause more frustration in the household than good, right? But being very vigilant about changes in your child's behavior or changes in their health can make a significant difference.
You know, one thing I wanted to ask you about is something I observed as a student. We'd have a lot of classmates that say, I just don't understand. And at least one of them, now that they're adults, has told me that they have found out that they're dyslexic. You know, what instance of that do you think is happening here, if you have any idea, that is affecting? Because, for example, our literacy levels have really declined in the past decade or so. So I wonder if that could be a factor.
So here's an interesting perspective on that. We live in a world where we have maintained very similar methods of education, though many things have changed. There is a lot of research and information, and I've seen some efforts the Ministry of Education is putting that bit into our teachers. Diverse learners. You have a classroom of diverse learners, and so you may have a student, the reason they're not understanding is because the chalk and talk methodology that is still used a lot in the system is just not reaching them. They need tactile, they need to be engaged. You see, we may not realize it, but when you're in primary school and you get the bottle cover them to count, that's a tactile way of mathematics, you know.
Yes.
It's the same concept as the tally, but it's a visual, you know, hands-on way of doing it. And oftentimes students just need that kind of engagement throughout their entire academic life, and they'll be so much better off. Back in 2004, I pulled out the book to make sure I get the right statistics. Anita Gail Geddes had pulled a really good book on disability and inequality. For anybody who has an interest in getting a really comprehensive picture of what is happening in the sector, at least as far back as 2004, which is pre-COVID, and you know, COVID did shift up quite a bit of things. But looking at that data, 5% of the individuals who were engaged indicated slow learning as the challenge that they were experiencing. Now, 5% can seem like nothing. You know, when you think about it, you say 5% is neither here nor there. It's a small percentage. But let's think about the entire academic environment, that primary and secondary grouping. Couple thousand, 100,000 students. 5% of a couple 100,000 students is not 5 kids. And so when you think about students experiencing slow learning, or at least it's just listed here as slow learning, which could be a myriad of different things, then of course there are children in the system, in the broader system, who have sight and hearing challenges that are not being adequately acknowledged and so are adequately attended to, and so they are in mainstream schools instead of being in specialized institutions. At that time, the frequency of sight challenges or disabilities related to sight was 32% and hearing 12%. So assuming that we pull all these together in the average classroom of 40 odd kids, that's a large number of your students, because that 32 plus that 12 plus that 5% is a solid just about 50% of your class.
But you know, one of the questions, Kimberly, that have often been raised, and I remember when we put this topic on our social media pages, someone asked a question, that are we being reasonable and balanced when we talk about things such as integrated learning? And I would ask you to speak to perhaps the educational setup. I know Heidel, for example, they try to ensure that children with various abilities are able to at least be in that same space at a school where you don't feel socially excluded. What is your position, and can you share some insight with us when we talk about the integration within school setting where in the past we had the School of Hope and so on? What is reasonable, a balance, if you will, so we don't socially exclude people?
So there is that it's an uncomfortable conversation for lots of persons, and that's because the school of thought behind in primary and secondary level, that integrated approach, is to ensure that when a student gets to, as a student develops, whether they are typically developing or a student with a disability, there is that sense of we are all here. That out of many, one people experience is evident. The challenge with that is realistically our system cannot manage a child with a severe disability, and in some instances a child with a moderate disability in the mainstream system, because it is already a challenge to teach 44 students. And let's be honest, many of our schools, the class size is not 50, it's not 20. And so when you begin to look at the integrated approach to education, students with severe disabilities can be very much left behind in mainstream without the supports that they'll need. When we start to look at specialized education now, they call it segregated education, but I don't like to use that term because it gives a we and them kind of answer, right? When you look at when you begin to pull education apart and you are fair to the reality that a student who has severe hearing loss that requires sign language as their mode of communication to ensure that they are adequately being supported, a student with a severe intellectual disability who requires significant support. In the mainstream school, you're not able to provide adequate personnel or adequate personnel with requisite training to properly attend to the needs of our students. Where we need to improve is getting to the point where we have more integrated non-educational environments so that students can see each other.
Yes.
For example, students who are, you have blind cricket, you have the Special Olympics, but a deaf student doesn't fall in any category. Deaf schools, we do not enter champs. We have never had that opportunity. But we do not fall into the requisite categories for Special Olympics.
Interesting. Kimberly, hold that thought first.
But it's not being supported. So,
Kimberly, hold that thought first. We passed the break and the producer is looking at us. And then we return, we take some of your final thoughts.
Yes. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. Kimberly, I know you were on a train of thought, but I had a question I wanted to ask you before you gave us your final thoughts. And that is, we're talking about the specialized institutions and so on. How prolific are these institutions? Like, do we have one in every parish, for example, that could cater to, for example, a deaf child? And is it something that is subsidized by the government? Is it something that is receiving support? Or how accessible is it to parents, particularly those in a lower socioeconomic, from a lower socioeconomic background?
So Jade is touching on that last point I wanted to make in this segment here. Okay. The issue of specialized schools are not in every parish, and we know that. We recognize that limitation. Part of the reason for that is because it's kind of hard to fight to say we need more schools when a lot of these kids aren't being adequately placed in education. So let's start from here. There is a space for integrated as well as specialized education. There is room and need for both. Where we have a challenge, the best interest of the child. You guys started the conversation, today about that, ensuring that the best interest of the child is being considered. There are parents who will select an option based on convenience, and we respect that. The difficulty is that down the line, the impact to the child. Remember, our kids grow up to be their own whole adults. And so you want to make sure that you are picking an option that is the best interest of the child. It may mean, so quite a few of the schools, the special education schools, do benefit from a subsidy from government. And so through the special education department at the Ministry of Education, they will connect you to a specialized school we do have quite a few parents, as when I speak to colleagues at other schools, they do have some parents. The parent is referred for special education, and the parent says, I'm not taking it up. I want my child to go to this school. In some instances, it's the bragging rights, if you will, that everybody in my family has gone to X school. And in other instances, it's convenience, and we respect that. But there are some serious challenges that we have right now with ensuring that education is accessible to the students who need it most. And there is also that challenge of ensuring that the parents feel supported in the decision that they make. I know there are some parents who will choose to go with a mainstream institution and then constantly have challenges having their child get the support that they need at school. Through the special education unit, parents are able to request shadows. Parents are able to request, I believe it's time and a half for a student with a disability who needs additional time for exams and for assessment. But we realize that some schools have been hesitant, and in some instances the schools, it's not that they wouldn't want to, it's just that they really don't have the personnel or the facilities to support the child. So we know that schools are limited. We also want the parents to make a decision in placing their child in an environment where they feel most comfortable, and it's a delicate balance. But I 100% urge the parents, communicate with the agency that would represent the disability that the child is most significantly impacted by. So you may have a child with multiple disabilities. Let's say it's hearing loss and a physical disability, but the hearing loss is more of has a significant impact on the child's education compared to the physical disability. Let's have a conversation about what would work best for you as a parent. We don't want it to be a situation where a parent is being kept at home because a child is being kept at home because a parent can't make a decision. We want to be able to provide that support, and none of us as agencies want the child to be home and not have the opportunity to be a nation builder.
All right. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Thank you for joining us on the show. We are basically running out of time, so I'm so sorry to have brought you up to this time.
Thanks, Mrs. Marriott Blake. I hope we will see you tomorrow.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm confirming her attendance to a meeting on air. Yes. All right. Have a good day. Thank you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Right. No, I want to shift focus, Jade and listeners, for the next few minutes around the matter of the constitutional reform process. And it's not a conversation that we can touch on, just a one-off situation. It's something that we're going to be pressing ahead with in terms of our opinions and having detailed conversations going forward around the reform process and specific recommendation. I want to point out that the Constitutional Reform Committee, there would have been several articles by Professor Trevor Monroe of the National Integrity Action, Jeanette Calder from Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, the Jamaica Council of Churches, and others who have levied some concerns, criticisms, recommendations about how consultative and participatory the process is. And if you recall, several weeks before we had Dr. Nadine Spence, and we discussed the challenges we had with the makeup, not in terms of lawyer, non-lawyer only, but in terms of how participatory the process would be and the public education needed.
And to be frank, it's not an issue that is being addressed by only us in the non-governmental space. I mean, even at the town hall the other day, there were several participants.
So they started having town hall meetings now.
Well, and they've had one town hall meeting since
in Montego Bay.
In Montego Bay, yes.
And they started engaging. I know Sujay Boswell engaged some youths and so on.
I think there's another meeting scheduled for Manchester coming up as well.
Yes, one is tomorrow, I believe, as well. Somewhere. And the committee has had its 5th meeting. But the concerns that we have is that phase 1 seems to be already decided.
Yeah, it is.
And people don't want to feel as if why would I be submitting something to an email? I don't know what you're asking me to submit an opinion on, because I know not what would replace King Charles III, who was coronated. I don't know why we were watching that, but we were, as a people across the world.
You were.
I wasn't. When I'm against something, I am. I mean, that's how I am. But when you look at these things, I ask people, do you understand the options? Should the public education come first, then engagement come after? Now, for me, when I listen to Minister Malahoo Fort responding to that gentleman, I'm sure the minister knows the option. So I won't go down that line as some people would. That's not the road that we need to take. The road that we need to take is if public education is truly taking place. One would expect the CRC, and it doesn't need to be the CRC either, they can have public education officers out who have these things prepared. So my question is, what exactly is the talking point? Yeah. Because if you're going to be replacing the monarchy, you must give me options. What you're going to be replacing the monarchy with?
It's not that they must give us options, clearly. Because what has been done is that they've decided what this new leadership will look like. And I think it's one of, even was watching Beyond the Headlines, and I saw several discussions on the point where the concern, the criticism is that we are being educated as though we don't have a choice, as though there aren't many options.
And my fear is, Jade, the people will soundly and roundly reject.
Absolutely.
When we call a referendum. And I want to say to the government, I am for removing the monarchy.
Absolutely.
But it ought not to be tied to an election cycle. Because should the People's National Party win the next election, for me, it has to go across administration where we get this thing right. You know, I see Damian Mitchell from the Gleaner tweeting, St. Lucia has now become the 5th country
to join
accept
the CCJ,
the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Yes. And
we don't even know where we stand as a people on these
the
things.
issue. Yes, absolutely.
Right? And that is my fear again. We need to have a comprehensive understanding where the points of consensus may very well be between the two political parties. But I want to say to both the Jamaica Labour Party and the People's National Party, no dunce, no there. Jamaican people not going to have a set of people decide among themselves for us. We will reject it.
Absolutely.
That's the sentiment I'm getting.
That is a common sentiment from
this is not 1962.
Yes.
We need to look at what worked in the 1990s when we reformed the Constitution then, when we made attempts to.
Exactly.
Right?
We need to see what not bring those things to full circle.
And I want to remind those who are on that Constitutional Reform Committee that you're not an echo chamber for the government. You're there to represent the sectors, and one must get a sense that your independence remain. That is what I would caution as we close out the show.
Absolutely.
But much more to come.
Yes. We'll continue the conversation next week. Thank you so much for joining us. This was Let's Start Justice. I'm Jade Williams.
I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director. Thank you so much, and see you again next week. Have a blessed Tuesday.